Thanks, Lee. I'm so happy to be here, and hold on just a second. I didn't do that on purpose. I meant to have the first slide up. There we go. But that was Benjamin. I'm very excited to be here, and Eva specifically asked me to talk about transmedia and story, and how story gets connected into gameplay. And I think today I've been listening. I expected story to come up more often today. People really have been talking a lot about assessment, about curriculum, about mapping different standards to different learning engagement opportunities, but actually not that many people have been talking very much about story. So I'm excited to have a moment to talk about that a little bit. And I'll start just with my own story. Lee shared that I was an English major, so I think there probably aren't that many English majors here in the room. If you were an English major, raise your hand. Oh yeah, a few of you. Great. All right. So for those of you who were English majors, you know that at some point you go far beyond just reading stories for looking at the stereotypical, like what's the symbolism in this, or can you find the metaphor? At some point you get really deep into the criticism and the theory around what makes a story really engaging and what makes someone connect with it. Because story really, if we all just go way back to our roots, story is really about engagement, and this is like our human experiences through the stories that we share with each other, the stories that we learn, the stories that kind of grow up around us. And in my experience at Stanford, I was focused on story and getting deep into the weeds on it. I was, studying Vladimir Prop's morphology of the folktale and getting really deep into, what are the tropes, the things that go into story development that actually kind of help hook people in and get them really engaged. And at the same time, I was doing a side curriculum through the sociology and education department about child development and how children learned and how they grew through learning. So I was trying to put these two things together. That's what I was working on, was really trying to think about what engages children into stories, what kinds of things propel them in narrative to the point that they get so immersed in it that they want to learn everything about it. And I think probably all of you in this room can think of stories that you encountered as a child that you probably could recite to me right now. One of your favorite books or your favorite movie, things that you remember every detail of it because something about it connected with you so closely that you never really let go of it. You kind of carried that story with you. So I was very interested in that and trying to put those pieces together. So fast forward a few years, 1996, I was back at Stanford working on a master's degree in English. And I had done some work then as a preschool teacher. I had done some field research with kids and media habits and how they were engaging with media. And I ended up in this very experimental class. And the year is important because if you think 1996 in Silicon Valley, there's like this huge boom going on. There's so much happening. And two professors at Stanford decided that they needed to put together a course that was experimental, that put English master students together with computer science master students. It was called Interactive Narrative and Artificial Intelligence. And Barbara Hayes Roth was the computer science professor. Some of you may be familiar with her work. At the time, she was doing a lot of work with artificial intelligence and interactive narrative. She was doing a lot of stuff with digital puppetry and children, like how do you create story with multiple storytellers. Now she's doing a lot of things in the healthcare field involving interactive simulations. Larry Friedlander was the English professor, and he was focused on Shakespeare, but he had just spent a year at MIT thinking about interactive Shakespeare. So he was taking these stories that all of us have known for a very long time and trying to think about ways of making them interactive with his students. And the two of them really set up to the premise to us on the very first day. They said, we're doing this class because we're watching what's happening around us in Silicon Valley, and we're realizing that we've got a problem. And the problem is that there's all of this great technology happening, And those of you who know so much about story and about narrative are afraid of the technology and would really rather just stay in the corner with your books and your theory. And those of you who are in the trenches really building it are then getting the burden of trying to create story within the software you're developing and within the games you're developing. And we're going to be totally honest, it's not working. You aren't building great games. And so what they did is they sent all of the English students to an HTML crash course, and we spent 3 days learning all the basics of code. They sent all the computer science students to an improv workshop and made all of them do live interactive narrative for several days. It was very interesting to get a taste of each other's worlds, but then it also meant that we kind of could speak enough of each other's language when we came back together that we could start working on really interesting projects. So this was obviously a very formative experience in my life. I had, at this point, thought that I was going to be going into education or into children's publishing and really thinking about narrative as how it drives educational development. And I came through this thinking, no, actually, it's about interactivity. There's something really exciting about the construction of narrative in an interactive space. So fast forward almost 20 years, here I am at PBS Kids, and really diving deep into what it means to be creating transmedia story experiences. Just to touch on the reach, I mean, it's been mentioned a few times now, 13 million unique visitors per month come to pbskids.org. But also 82% of all children between the ages of 2 and 8 watch PBS Kids on television at some point during a given week. So that is a lot of children who are engaging with the shows on PBS Kids. Someone asked earlier during Jeremy's speech about our demographic reach, and this is one slide I happen to have with me. This is the breakdown of the online audience, and you can see we over-index pretty significantly among Asian, Hispanic, and African American households. Another one that I didn't have on me, so I couldn't pull into this, is we also over-index with lower income families. And that's incredibly important to PBS. We feel very strongly about that, making sure that we really are reaching the children who need us the most. So if you take all of that reach, and you take what we're trying to do with story, the word that we've been using recently is transmedia. Just in the last few years, this is something that we've kind of embraced at PBS. But the concept is something that's been with us for quite some time. The concept of transmedia really is that you are developing a narrative world that is so consistent across any platform in which it might exist that a child or even an adult, whoever engages with this narrative, recognizes the rules of that world wherever they encounter it. So one of the advisors that we work with a lot, who some of you may know, Jesse Schell from Carnegie Mellon and from Shell Games, has spent a lot of time talking to our group about this as like Pokemon as being a really great example of a beautifully contained transmedia world, because the rules are exactly the same, whether you are playing the card game or whether you are watching the movie or watching the TV show. Sometimes different pieces of the story show up in different areas, but they all help you understand the wider world of Pokemon. So that's kind of the concept there. And at PBS Kids, probably 7 years ago, we decided to change the model for how we even let people pitch shows to us. We didn't want you to just pitch a show. When you came to PBS Kids, you needed to go ahead and pitch the world to us. You needed to come to us with an idea of how that narrative could begin to expand into other platforms, into the other experiences. And for us, that meant digital, so interactivity, but also in away from screen worlds. How would a child play this in the backyard? How would a parent talk to the child about this show in a way that would help continue the educational space beyond that? So what that means is also we're really different about our production model. A lot of media organizations, when they take on a new show, that you've got the show creator, and then there's a separate silo that does digital. And the show comes in, and then you hand it over to that other silo, and they start building games. We tell producers right out of the gate, we don't want it to work that way. We want you to bring us the idea, but then you, that show creator, we also want you to be involved at some level in thinking about the digital experience and in thinking about those offline experiences, whether it means allowing your script writers to be in the room when you're developing games to make sure that the voice is really consistent across everything, or whether it means that you actually come up with some ideas for games yourself, knowing that that isn't your area of expertise, but thinking about how you know your characters would interact. Jeff Gomez from Starlight Runner is someone who does a lot of work in the transmedia space here in LA and in New York as well. And he always talks about you need to have the creative visionary, and then that creative visionary needs to be able to talk to all the other groups or have IP stewards who are there to kind of defend the way that narrative is going to extend in all these different areas to make sure that the world is really consistent. So if I think about some of my favorite transmedia worlds, I think about as I was growing up, Star Wars was one of my favorites. And we played Star Wars in the backyard. I mean, in addition to the movies, we played Star Wars in the backyard. We played with Star Wars action figures. I had the, sorry, I just knocked that out. I had the R2-D2 read-along storybooks where you'd ring the bell and turn the page. If you all remember that. But there are some things that actually went off story for Star Wars. How many of you remember, it was like in the late 70s, there was a Wookiee Christmas special? So yeah, a few of you remember that. Yeah, that didn't stick around. That went way out of the regular Star Wars vision of that story. And certainly the audience recognized that this didn't fit. You know, Chewbacca was trying to get home in time for Christmas, and there were musical numbers. It didn't fit with the narrative world that George Lucas had constructed, and that's not something that has held on in the Star Wars canon. So we're trying to think about this then. If Curious George is a character in a story that kids have been connecting to for a really long time, then what can Curious George do in an organic way around education that then would help the child engage with that educational goal? So in the case of Curious George, he's a very curious monkey. He likes to take things apart. He likes to put them back together again. It's actually a story that's ripe for an engineering curriculum. And so that's what Curious George is on PBS Kids. It's based on an engineering curriculum. And so you can take that a few steps further. What are other things that George can do within that curriculum that would be really natural to George, that wouldn't be breaking the world of George, or making George do anything that would be out of character, that would then extend that learning? And that's how George got into math. Jeremy shared today that we've done a suite of 26 George games specifically around math. And it feels very consistent. Engagement is really high, and kids really love this experience. So I want to go through 3 things fairly rapidly about ways that games can or cannot interact with story. And some of these are fairly obvious, but I think based on the conversations we're having today about assessment and engagement and how kids get into it, I'd like you to just kind of take the idea of story and layer it across some of the things we've been talking about today. So first step is really incorporating stories into games. And this is something that we did wrong at PBS Kids for a really long time. We felt so strongly about narrative as being a big engagement driver that we would say to our producers, I want you to go back and pitch me a game idea, but you've got to really get the story into it. What's the backstory? Why is this character doing this? What propels you into the game development? And so producers were developing gorgeous things, and they were doing intro animations and everything else. And what happened was the child was constantly skipping the intro animation, because in that moment when they were sitting at the screen and making the decision about, am I going to play a game or watch a video, they've chosen, I'm going to play a game. And they wanted to jump right into the gameplay. But the great thing was they already knew that transmedia world. So we actually didn't need to give them new backstory. They already understood how Curious George worked, and now they're ready to play with George. They'd probably watched him, and now they knew what to do. So an example I want to share is the Wild Kratts. How many of you know this show on PBS Kids? I'm beginning to see who has children in the audience. So the Kratts brothers are live brothers who are zoologists and have done a few shows that are about animal behavior. And this game is specifically about animal characteristics and being able to recognize how some animals can do things that other animals can't. And so in every show, they are live action, and then they jump into an animated world. They study that animal, they learn about the characteristics, and then they create a creature power suit that allows them to do what that animal can do. So when you come to the website, kids already kind of know what this story is all about, and they're ready to put on that creature power suit and become that animal. And so Monkey Mayhem is one of the most popular games on pbskids.org right now. And basically what you're doing is mimicking animal behavior. You're being able to jump right in and be a monkey. And so you're part of the story right out of the gate. Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood on PBS Kids is a new show from the Fred Rogers Company based on his social-emotional curriculum. And in this space, kids can mimic what's happening on television, jump into Daniel's imaginary sequences, and work through social-emotional stories. So again, it's a very narrative-driven experience, but we didn't have to give them any backstory. They know how to get right into it. One of my favorite examples of transmedia, really successful transmedia work, is from our friends at Sesame Workshop, who did The Electric Company, and they did a little special set of games with The Electric Company called Prankster Planet. And what they did was they did an animated sequence at the end of the show that was more comic book style. It set up these characters in this world fighting the pranksters, and then it would end with a cliffhanger. So on television, you've watched 2 minutes, terrible cliffhanger, and then you have to jump online to finish out the experience and to find out how to end it. And you jumped right into the game. And so Prankster Planet is all focused on vocabulary development and literacy skills. And so that was very organic within the show itself, and when you jump into the game, you're right into those skills, doing the same things you were mimicking on television. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. I've been talking to way too many of you today. Now, this isn't as easy to do. You can't rely on a transmedia world if you have original IP. And so Fizzy's Lunch Lab is a show on that's only on pbskids.org. It's a digital-only show. And so when we came to them and said we want to do a really immersive game experience, they recognized they had to be building, like layering in some narrative in order to really make this work. And so what they did was some opening animations, but very short. They weren't doing huge backstory. You're kind of jumping right in. They're kind of explaining who the characters are. You immediately jump into mini gameplay and then back out into the story. A really nice sequencing of video components that set up the nutrition curriculum of this, and then get kids into the gameplay and right back out into more narrative. So a very kind of fun experience to get them through. So I think a question that comes up from a lot of the game developers we work with is story really necessary? Like, I understand that story is good for engagement, kids love stories, they get into it, but come on, we've all played Tetris. There's no story, and you still can achieve flow, you still can get really into it. I never remember why it is the birds are so angry at those pigs. It's fairly loose backstory, and it doesn't really matter. The gameplay can be really fun. But what I'd like to suggest to you all is that even those games that don't necessarily have a story, if you think about younger kids, they're often layering story all over things or looking for the story that's a little bit more universal. So some of my favorite apps that are out right now are done by Toca Boca. And all of these are very open-ended play experiences, really fun games. And they don't have backstory, they don't have recognizable characters. But if you look at it, they actually are all based on pretty universal stories. So Toca Band is super fun. If you haven't played it, you should check it out. But all kids kind of recognize what it would mean to be in a rock band, and that you need different players, and that they're going to play different instruments. And so they can jump right into it because the stories have kind of universal themes. Same with driving cars or with having a tea party. Minecraft has come up so many times today, and this is the game that comes up most often when I ask my team, what do you think is the best open-ended game out there right now? Or if I say, what is the best game out there right now that isn't narrative-driven? They will often say Minecraft. But then when we talk to parents about Minecraft and how kids get involved in it, We did one experiment where I asked people to just tell us a little bit about, like, how are your kids playing Minecraft? Like, what are they doing with it? And parents were sending us videos of their kids playing Minecraft, and in almost every single video, the kid would start to tell you the story of what they were building. There was a narrative that they were bringing to this experience, and they were making it their own, and it was this open creative space. It was really exciting to see. We recently launched an app for Dinosaur Train, which is completely open. It's kind of a dinosaur encyclopedia, and so it's the alphabet, and each letter has a dinosaur associated, and you can learn more about it. And when we did play testing with kids, there was a whole group of kids in the room who, when they first looked at this first page with the train and would start swiping it, would start telling the story of where these letters were going on the train. They couldn't look at this without layering on some kind of story or telling a story to themselves. And I think this is, a non-digital game, but I don't know how many of you are familiar with Goldie Blocks. I was on a panel with them this year at South by Southwest and talking a lot about girls and games and girls and sciences. And when their founder was creating the company, she really wanted to make a construction toy for girls. But what she discovered as she was doing play testing with the toys is that this particular audience really was looking for a narrative. And so she ended up packaging a little book with the toy. And so you've got a narrative that drives you through as you're doing this construction play. And this made her engagement go up really exponentially. If you all are interested in this story, she has a really great TEDx talk. Her name is Debbie Sterling, about girls in engineering. And it's worth watching, just seeing how she kind of came to this idea. But I love this, that in order to get someone into the gameplay, she felt like she really needed to add a story into it. So Fred Rogers was very, very wise. And one of the things that we come back to often is the fact that when kids are playing, they really are practicing what they're learning, that their play is so intrinsic to their ability to learn new things. And it's role play, it's when they're playing with their blocks, when they're playing with their toys, they often are telling a story to themselves in order to kind of learn how the world works. And I was thinking about this because open-ended play is something that in the assessment world is a little bit harder to measure. And I think that a lot of the games that we see that are really trying to look deeply at learning assessment and engagement in the classroom feel like you can't really do open-ended so much because you can't really measure what kids have done. What Jeremy has done, the work that he's been doing with PBS Kids and kind of getting into different kinds of games and what kids are learning in those games has helped us recognize that those open-ended games are actually wonderful experiences for introducing concepts to kids and letting them play with it. So they've got an open space to tinker with it, to try out some of the skills and thoughts that they're trying to figure out, and then later play a different kind of game to start getting at some of the real practice and deeper assessment. So we feel like there's a real space for this kind of open-ended play experience and a place for kids to be able to explore some skills and curriculum areas on their own. And I think then the PBS Kids mission is that we want media to spark children's curiosity and expand their possibilities. And I often take that to mean we want them to get them so interested in something that they then take that away from the screens and want to learn about it in the world as well. I know this came up a little bit earlier today, and I think there's a space for all of these different types of play. Sasha's point saying that like when you get really deep into gameplay, you achieve a level of expertise that's really important. And then you can also, I would say, you then can take that level of expertise and begin applying it to other things that are happening in the real world. So that's where we kind of want kids to go. So one other kind of narrative that I think is really important for us to think about is kind of the English major, like super nerdy, fun conversation, which is the reader also a character in the narrative, and how does that fit in? Like you spent so much time, English majors probably spent so much time thinking about that. What place does the reader play? And this is where interactivity then actually gives you that opportunity, because you can actually put yourself in the game and be a character in this narrative. So there are some really simple ways that we do it, certainly with young children, just with personalization, choosing which character you want to be through the experience, so you're identifying who you want to be, letting you kind of personalize the music in the background, the bottom right, the fact that now we can use cameras and kids can put their own pictures into the gameplay experience. That's really fun for young kids and a really great way to kind of get them into the experience. And then also avatars, certainly, being able to create your own version of yourself to then go into this world and start creating the world around you. I have never been scooped by a video of myself before, but this morning there was a video of me talking about this game. I'm going to go ahead and show it to you. It's called Going Batty. And this is also from the Wild Kratts site. But what we're doing is using... That's like my favorite moment when Noah's like, yeah. What we're doing is using that camera to allow the kid to go into the game and become the animal. And so Noah then gets to be the bat and experience being the bat. And we did a series of experiments with body input stuff where we had kids like jumping like a caracal. That's a cat, for those of you who aren't familiar with caracals, jumping like a caracal to catch his food. And what we realized is that kids started gaming the game. They just were jumping up and down as fast as they could because they realized it didn't really matter if they caught the right thing. If they just jumped a lot, they would win the game and do well, and then be really tired and ask for water and things we'd never heard in focus groups before. It was really fun. But then when we tried this kind of thing where you actually were asking the child to mimic specific animal behaviors and try to embody that animal, that character, then they actually afterwards had really great retention of this facts about the bat. They knew what the bat ate, they knew how the bat slept. They really came away with a really good understanding. And I think this is one of the things that's really revolutionary about where we are with gameplay and technology right now is the fact that kids can get their whole bodies into an experience. And what does that mean for what they learn? So just to kind of wrap up this section, when we're talking about transmedia, we really are talking about how you take the story and make it organic across multiple media types. And so I'm just sharing with you game examples, but obviously this is something that needs to extend into the video pieces as well, into the offline activities. And so we're not approaching it with the gamification idea. We're not approaching it with, we have this particular skill, now let's make it into, like put in some gaming pieces and make it into a learning experience. And we also aren't talking about celebrity endorsement. We aren't saying, we've got this learning game, and now let's put Curious George on it, because that will make kids jump in. And it's true that putting Curious George on it would make kids immediately jump into the experience because they love George. But at some point, that world is going to break down, because George is going to suddenly be doing things that he wouldn't do naturally. And for kids who are really engaged in that character, that's actually going to be a turnoff for them. I was talking to Zoran about this after his talk today, because I was very conflicted about the idea of the Harry Potter algorithms. Because I was thinking, at one level that's great celebrity endorsement, that's a great way to immediately hook a kid into it. But then what if Neville Longbottom asks you to do something in a problem that's like totally not something he would ever do in the story? Kids who are super immersed in Harry Potter might get really turned off by that. Zoran said that they're actually working with people who are doing the fan fiction for a lot of these worlds to kind of create those scenarios. And so he's like, so they've got it covered. I was like, I don't know. You still got to think really carefully about how that story is being constructed and how you're testing it. So I'm really fascinated to see how that might continue. But certainly our experience is that the education really needs to be very much embedded in it and natural to the experience. The newest show that's launched on PBS Kids is called Peg Plus Cat, and it's a math show. It stars a little girl named Peg and her sidekick Cat. And when we were working on that show, we put the call out to hundreds of different producers to say, PBS Kids wants to do a new preschool math series. And we talked to probably, at least 50 different producers, ultimately got 38 fully formed proposals, took 4 to full piloting experiences, and then ended up choosing Peg plus Cat. And it started with, we want it to be math, but it's got to be really organic to the experience. So this isn't easy. This is actually pretty hard. It takes a lot of people with a lot of different perspectives coming from a lot of different disciplines to make it work. But we really think that it pays off. So with that, I want to share just a few of the research findings that have come out of some of this transmedia development work. PBS is often seen as the #1 educational media brand for children, so we feel really strongly about this layering of education into what we're doing. And we came to these producers through this Ready to Learn grant, which is a project in partnership with the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and funded by the U.S. Department of Education. We came into it with the premise that a child who experienced certain educational skills across more than one media type was more likely to come away with a strong understanding of those skills than a child who only interacted with it in one media type. And so we chose producers for whom math could be a natural curriculum extension of what they were doing. And we shared with them our curriculum framework, which we worked on with several child development and early math specialists, looking at Common Core and then building it down through the preschool years. And shared it with them and said, begin mapping the skills that you believe that your characters can embody naturally, and begin working on video pieces and game pieces and then offline activity ideas that would then begin to cover some pieces of this curriculum framework in a really natural way. So many of these transmedia suites have already been launched. These are the ones that Jeremy was talking about today. And a few people were asking about these games, assuming they were kind of in a separate package on the side. Actually, all of these games have been launched live on pbskids.org. So they are part of the pbskids.org ecosystem. And so they really are being hit by the entire audience. There are two major studies that have taken place with the first round of these games that have come out of this particular transmedia education model. And the first one was done by EDC SRI. Shelley Pasnick, I know, was here earlier today and was one of the lead researchers on this. And the study took place last year, a 10-week trial in 92 classrooms, kids ages 4 to 5. And some of the findings were that low-income kids in particular showed significant gains in math skills when they were interacting with these transmedia modules within the classroom. So most of the things we do for PBS Kids are informal learning, but in this case we were doing a test actually putting it into the classroom. And then also that the preschool teachers who were involved in integrating these transmedia experiences into their curriculum came away with changes in their confidence levels about not only the math concepts, but also how to integrate the technology into the classroom experience. The key takeaways for us, things that we really wanted to then bring into the next phase of this transmedia work, is that certainly if teachers are going to be using this, if we're talking about using it in a formal experience, then the teachers need support, and that's come up a lot today about the importance of making sure teachers know how to really incorporate this into their classrooms in a natural way. But then also that transitioning and sequencing were key, that the games couldn't just be kind of thrown out there here and there, that if we found a way to kind of give them to teachers in an order and built some glue in between with those offline activities, the learning gains were much greater. The second study was conducted by Wested, and this one was done in the more naturalistic PBS Kids setting, the home. It's a 10-week trial with 120 families. And the parents were given, I know Betsy was here earlier, I don't know if she's still here, but Betsy McCarthy was a part of that study. The parents were given some very light training as well, just kind of some information about how to incorporate this at home and making sure we were getting the right dosage so we could really test this over time. And the takeaways here were also really strong. First of all, that this content was setting kids up for entry into kindergarten. It seemed to really be giving them some foundational skills. And that the transmedia math content was positively associated in gains in kids' math knowledge, particularly around 3-year-olds. That's something we're diving into a little bit more. Why did the needle move so much more with the 3-year-olds? And then also the parents' awareness of their child's learning really improved here. It made parents more likely to want to get involved in their kids' learning. Both of these studies are posted on pbskids.org/lab, the PBS Kids Lab site, where we kind of document everything that's happening within this Ready to Learn project. And I think the takeaways from both are, first of all, certainly that we have positive gains in how children learned math from these transmedia experiences. And so we feel like our premise really did bear out and kind of kept with all the things that we've been trying to do for a really long time. The other thing that I think is really exciting for us, and something that we're diving into a lot more, is around parent engagement. The fact that parents who were involved in these experiences really suddenly felt empowered to be engaged in their kids' learning. And particularly for low-income parents, this was a big deal. In messaging with them very early on, many low-income parents would say to us, you know, my kid is learning at school, don't put that pressure on me, I shouldn't be teaching them at home. But in actuality, they really did want to be able to interact with their kids at home. They just needed it to be done in a way that felt really accessible to them. And this gameplay and pieces of video was acted kind of as a leveler, because once parents looked over their kids' shoulders and saw what they were playing in a game, suddenly it clicked for them, because that was something they could play too. That was something they understood. They understood these worlds and these narratives and wanted to be involved in it. So lots of parent engagement work excuse me, happening at PBS Kids right now. I'm sorry it's not 8 days later. We're making a big announcement about some new parent engagement tools on May 8th, so watch out for those. And would love people's feedback as you see the kind of work we're doing, trying to engage parents in this work. And really, for us, we feel like all of these new technologies are providing us with new opportunities for learning, and well beyond just math. Math is where we're focused right now, because that's what the Ready to Learn grant was focused on. But as you can see, PBS Kids shows cover a really wide range of curriculum areas. And social emotional development is something that we're diving into very dramatically right now, feeling like those school readiness skills in the social emotional category are things that are key for us to learn more about, for how to set up those skills for kids and also how to assess them. So that's the overview from me. Thank you for letting me talk about story. I really appreciate it. It was fun.